Florida theme parks are supposed to be the happiest places on Earth. Millions of families visit every year, creating magical memories that last a lifetime. But what happens when the magic turns dark? Tonight, I'm sharing 6 true horror stories from Florida's most famous theme parks. These aren't urban legends or stories I found online. These are real experiences from people who worked there and lived through things that would make your worst nightmares seem tame. The thing about theme parks is they never really sleep. Even when the guests go home, the rides keep running tests, and sometimes things that shouldn't be there start moving in the shadows. Florida's theme parks have a dark history that the companies don't want you to know about. Accidents, deaths, and disappearances that get covered up to protect the brand. But the dead don't stay buried in a place built on swampland. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is. Tell me which of these stories disturbs you the most. After hearing these, you'll never look at theme parks the same way again. Let's begin with the first story. Story 1. The Ghost in the Haunted Mansion. I worked as a ride operator at one of Orlando's biggest theme parks for 3 years. The Haunted Mansion was my regular assignment, and I thought I knew everything about that attraction. The 999 ghosts, the moving portraits, the singing busts. It was all animatronics and special effects, until I met a real ghost. It was a Tuesday night in October, just after closing time. I was doing my final walkthrough of the ride to make sure everything was secure for the night. I was checking the attic scene when I heard something that made me freeze. Piano music. Someone was playing the wedding march on the old piano in the bride's scene. But the piano was just a prop. I walked toward the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The music got louder as I approached the bride animatronic. She was supposed to be powered down, but her eyes were glowing red. That's when I saw her. A real woman in a wedding dress, sitting at the piano bench with her back to me. Her dress was old-fashioned and stained with something dark. Her long black hair hung down her back in matted strands. She was playing the piano with skeletal fingers that clicked against the keys. "Excuse me," I called out. "The park is closed. You need to leave." The music stopped immediately. The woman's head turned toward me, but it kept turning, all the way around until she was facing me backward, her neck twisted impossibly. Her face was rotted and decayed, with empty eye sockets that somehow still seemed to stare right at me. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, revealing rows of broken teeth. I ran. I made it to the exit and called security immediately. 3 guards came back with me to search the ride, but we found nothing. But the next morning, I did some research. In 1967, during the construction of the Haunted Mansion, a young woman named Patricia Mills had died in an accident. She was getting married the next day and had come to see the progress on the ride. A piece of scaffolding fell and crushed her while she was standing in what would become the attic scene. She died instantly, still wearing her wedding dress. The construction crew found her body at the base of an old piano that had been temporarily stored in the building. Her blood had stained the ivory keys. After that night, I started noticing things during my regular shifts, cold spots in the attic scene, the smell of old perfume mixed with something rotten, and sometimes guests would complain about a woman in a bloody wedding dress who wasn't part of the show. The worst incident happened during a busy Saturday afternoon. A family with 2 young kids was riding through the attic scene when their doom buggy suddenly stopped. The emergency lights came on, and I could hear screaming over the intercom. When I reached them, the mother was hysterical. She kept pointing at the bride animatronic and screaming, "She's real! She grabbed my daughter!" The little girl was catatonic with fear. She had deep scratches on her arm that looked like fingernail marks, but that was impossible. The bride animatronic was safely behind barriers. I helped evacuate the family and called for medical assistance. As the paramedics were treating the little girl's scratches, she finally spoke. The bride lady said she's lonely. She wants someone to stay and play with her forever. We shut down the ride for the rest of the day for a technical inspection, but I knew what had really happened. Patricia Mills was still there, still waiting for her wedding day. and she was getting desperate for company. I requested a transfer the next week. I couldn't handle working in that attraction anymore, knowing she was there, watching, waiting. But sometimes I wonder about the guests who visit the haunted mansion. Do they know they're not just seeing 999 happy haunts? Do they realize that one of the ghosts is real, and she's looking for someone to join her eternal wedding party? The theme park company has covered up dozens of incidents over the years. Scratches that appear on guests' arms, wedding rings that disappear from people's fingers, and sometimes guests who go into the haunted mansion and never come out. They're listed as missing persons, but I know the truth. Patricia Mills finally found her wedding guests, and she's not letting them leave. Story 2. The Ride That Kills. I was 16 when I got my first job at a major theme park in Central Florida. I was so excited to work on the roller coasters, especially the park's newest attraction, a massive steel coaster called Thunder Mountain. The ride had just opened that summer, and it was already famous for being one of the most intense coasters in the world. 3 loops, 2 corkscrews, and a 200-foot drop that left people screaming for more. But there was something wrong with Thunder Mountain, something the park didn't want anyone to know. It was killing people, not from mechanical failures or safety issues. The ride itself was perfectly safe, but every few weeks, a perfectly healthy person would get off Thunder Mountain and die within hours. Heart attacks, they said, brought on by the excitement and adrenaline. I first noticed the pattern during my 3rd week on the job. A college student named Jake Martinez rode Thunder Mountain 6 times in a row. He was laughing and having the time of his life when he got off the final time. 20 minutes later, he collapsed in the parking lot. The paramedics said his heart had basically exploded from the inside, like something had grabbed it and squeezed until it burst. 2 weeks later, it happened again. A teenage girl named Amy Chen. Perfect health, no medical issues. She rode Thunder Mountain once and seemed fine afterward. But that night, her parents found her dead in her hotel room. Another heart attack. Another impossible death. I started paying closer attention to the ride and the people who rode it. That's when I noticed the cold spots. Certain seats on Thunder Mountain were always freezing cold, even on the hottest Florida days. Guests would complain about feeling like they were sitting in a freezer, but maintenance insisted the air conditioning was working normally. The cold seats were always the ones where people died. I did some research and discovered something the park had tried to hide. During the construction of Thunder Mountain, 3 workers had died in accidents. They'd all fallen from the highest point of the coaster, the 200-foot drop. Their names were carved into a small memorial plaque hidden behind the ride's control room. Michael Torres, age 23. Jennifer Walsh, age 28. Robert Kim, age 31. All 3 had died on the same day when a support beam gave way. During my night shifts, when the park was closed and we were running test cycles on the coaster, I would see them, 3 figures standing at the top of the highest hill, looking down at the drop where they'd died. They looked exactly like living people, except for their eyes. Their eyes were completely black, like looking into deep water at night, and they were angry. I realized that the people who were dying weren't random victims. They were all sitting in the exact seats where Michael, Jennifer, and Robert would have been when they fell. The dead workers were taking revenge on the living, pulling their hearts right out of their chests as they experienced the same drop that had killed them. I tried to warn people. I would make excuses to close certain seats or tell guests they were broken, but my supervisors noticed and threatened to fire me. So I quit. But not before I tried one more thing. I stayed after hours and rode Thunder Mountain alone, sitting in Michael's seat. As the coaster climbed to the highest point, the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. At the top, just before the drop, I felt hands grab my shoulders. Michael Torres was sitting behind me, his face pale and his eyes black as night. "You don't belong here," he said in a voice like grinding metal. "This is our place now." People are dying, I told him. Innocent people who had nothing to do with what happened to you. They chose to ride. Jennifer's voice came from beside me. They chose to experience our death, so they can stay and experience it forever. The coaster dropped, and I felt invisible hands crushing my chest. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an iron fist. But at the last second, Robert Kim appeared in front of me. "Go," he whispered. The pressure on my chest released, and I gasped for air as the coaster came to a stop. I left Florida that night and never went back. But Thunder Mountain is still operating, and people are still dying. Story 3, The Children Who Never Left. The Small World ride at Florida's most famous theme park is supposed to be cheerful. Hundreds of singing dolls from around the world, all celebrating unity and happiness. It's a classic attraction that's been making families smile for decades. But what happens when some of the children who ride it never want to leave? I was working in attractions maintenance when I first heard about the disappearances. Kids would get on the Small World boats with their families, and somewhere during the 15-minute ride, they would vanish. Not all of them, just 1 or 2 every few months. Always children between the ages of 5 and 10, always kids who seemed enchanted by the singing dolls and bright colors. The park's official story was that these children had somehow fallen out of the boats and gotten lost in the tunnels behind the scenes. They would launch massive searches, but the kids were never found. But I knew better. I'd been working the night shift, doing routine maintenance on the ride's audio systems when I first saw them. Real children mixed in with the animatronic dolls. They were dressed in the same colorful costumes as the mechanical figures, and they sang along with the famous song. But their eyes were different, sad and empty, like they were dreaming with their eyes open. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The lighting in Small World is deliberately dim and colorful, and it would be easy to mistake a realistic doll for a real child. But then, one of them turned and looked directly at me. She was maybe 7 years old, with blonde pigtails and a blue dress that matched the Dutch section dolls. She smiled and waved, but her expression was vacant. "Hi there," I called out. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" She tilted her head like she didn't understand the question. "I live here now," she said in a sing-song voice that perfectly matched the ride's audio track. "I'm part of the family. We sing together forever and ever." I climbed down from the maintenance platform and walked toward her. But she faded back into the crowd of dolls like she was never there. I reported the incident to security, but they found nothing during their search. Over the next few weeks, I spotted more of them. A little boy in the Mexican section, dressed like a mariachi singer. Twin girls in the African section, wearing bright tribal costumes. A red-headed kid in the Irish section, playing a tiny fiddle. They all had that same empty, dreamy expression. And they all sang along with the dolls like they'd been doing it forever. I did some research and found missing persons reports that matched the children I was seeing. Emma Rodriguez, age 6, disappeared from Small World 3 months ago. The twins, Sarah and Sophie Miller, age 8, vanished during a family vacation last year. They were all there, singing their endless song. The worst part was realizing how it was happening. During busy days, I would watch families ride through the attraction. Most kids enjoyed the music and colors, but some became completely mesmerized. They would stare at the dolls with wide, unblinking eyes, swaying to the music like they were hypnotized. Those were the ones who disappeared. The ride's audio system was designed to be catchy and memorable, but for certain children, usually the ones who were lonely or sad, it became something more, a siren song that promised them a place where they would always belong. The breaking point came during a busy Saturday in December. A family from Michigan was riding through Small World when their 8-year-old son, Tyler, started acting strange. He began swaying and humming along with the dolls. Halfway through the ride, Tyler stood up in the boat and walked toward the Dutch section. His parents grabbed for him, but he moved with impossible strength, like he was being pulled by invisible strings. Security cameras showed Tyler climbing onto the platform with the singing dolls, but then the footage became corrupted. When the maintenance crew searched the area, they found Tyler's clothes folded neatly next to the Dutch windmill, but Tyler himself was gone. His parents were told he had somehow fallen into the water channels and drowned, despite the fact that the water was only 6 inches deep, but I knew Tyler hadn't drowned. The next night, I saw him in the Dutch section, wearing traditional wooden shoes and a little Dutch boy costume. He was singing along with the dolls, his eyes empty and distant. "It's a small world after all," he sang in perfect harmony with the mechanical figures around him. I quit the next day. But sometimes I wonder how many children are trapped in that ride now, singing their eternal song. Story 4. The mascot that wouldn't die. Every theme park has mascots. Those beloved characters in giant costumes who pose for pictures and hug children. They're supposed to bring joy and magic to families visiting the parks. But what happens when the person inside the costume dies and the character keeps walking around? I worked in character operations at one of Florida's biggest theme parks for 4 years. My job was to coordinate the mascot schedules and make sure all the characters were where they needed to be throughout the day. The performers were dedicated professionals who took their roles seriously. They understood that for many children, meeting their favorite character was the highlight of their entire vacation. But there was one character who made everyone uncomfortable. His name was Captain Adventure, a pirate-themed mascot who worked in the park's pirate-themed section. He was supposed to be cheerful and energetic, entertaining kids with sword fights and treasure hunts. The problem was that Captain Adventure had died 6 months ago. The performer inside the costume was a guy named Danny Walsh. He'd been playing Captain Adventure for 3 years and was one of our best character actors. Kids loved him, and he genuinely cared about making their day special. Danny had a heart attack while in costume during a busy Saturday afternoon. He collapsed right in front of a group of families, and paramedics couldn't revive him. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The park closed the pirate section for the rest of the day, and we held a memorial service for Danny the following week. His Captain Adventure costume was retired and put in storage. But 3 days after the funeral, Captain Adventure was back at work. I first saw him during my morning rounds, standing at his usual post near the pirate ship attraction. He looked exactly the same: red coat, black boots, feathered hat, and the distinctive skull and crossbones mask that covered his entire face. "Danny?" I called out, confused. "What are you doing here?" I stopped myself. Danny was dead. I'd been to his funeral. Captain Adventure turned toward me and waved, but he didn't speak. That was strange. Danny always greeted me with a hearty, "Ahoy there, matey," when he saw me. I walked closer and noticed something wrong with the way he moved. Danny had been energetic and fluid, but this Captain Adventure moved stiffly, like his joints were rusted. "Who's in the costume?" I asked my assistant, Maria. She looked at me strangely. "What do you mean?" "That's Danny." "Danny's dead, Maria. We went to his funeral last week." Maria's expression became concerned. "Are you feeling okay?" "Danny's been here all morning." I checked the schedule board. Sure enough, Danny Walsh was listed as Captain Adventure for the entire day, but that was impossible. I decided to confront whoever was in the costume directly. I followed Captain Adventure as he made his rounds, but the more I watched, the more disturbed I became. His movements were all wrong, too slow, too deliberate, and he never spoke, not even to whisper to cast members like the performers usually did. Worst of all, there was a smell around him, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in the sun. During his break time, I followed Captain Adventure to the character break room. He sat down heavily in a chair and remained perfectly still. Most performers would remove their headpiece during breaks, but Captain Adventure just sat there like a mannequin. "Danny?" I said quietly. "What's going on?" Captain Adventure's head turned toward me with a mechanical, jerky movement. Through the eye holes in his mask, I could see darkness. No eyes, no face, just empty blackness. "The show must go on," he said in a voice that sounded like Danny's, but wrong somehow. Hollow and echoing, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Danny died," I whispered. "You can't be here." "The children expect Captain Adventure," the thing in the costume replied. "I cannot disappoint them. The magic must continue." I backed out of the break room and called security immediately. But when they arrived, Captain Adventure was gone. They found the costume hanging neatly in the storage room where it had been retired. But the next day, he was back at his post. And the day after that, the park management decided it was easier to pretend nothing was wrong. But the cast members knew something was off. The costume smelled like death, and sometimes children would cry after hugging Captain Adventure. They said he felt cold and empty inside. I quit after a month of this. But Captain Adventure is still there, still entertaining guests, still refusing to accept that the show has ended. Some performers love their characters so much that not even death can make them give up the role. Story 5, The Tunnel of Terror. Beneath every major theme park is a network of tunnels. These underground passages allow employees to move around without being seen by guests, maintaining the magic and illusion of the park experience. Most tourists don't know these tunnels exist, but I worked in them for 2 years, and I can tell you, they're not just for employee transportation. They're also where the park keeps its darkest secrets. I was hired as a maintenance worker for one of Florida's biggest theme parks. My job was to repair and maintain the underground infrastructure that kept the park running: electrical systems, plumbing, air conditioning, and the computer networks that controlled all the attractions. The tunnel system was massive. Miles of corridors connected every section of the park, with storage rooms, break areas, and technical facilities branching off in all directions. But some areas of the tunnels were off limits, sections marked with red signs that said "Authorized personnel only" and required special key cards to access. My supervisor, Carl, was very clear about this during my first week. "Stay out of the restricted areas," he warned me. "That's corporate business, and they don't want us poking around." I was curious, but I followed the rules. The tunnels were creepy enough without venturing into forbidden territory. The fluorescent lights flickered constantly, casting moving shadows on the concrete walls. But after 3 months on the job, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Late at night, when the park was closed, I would see people in the restricted tunnels. They wore dark uniforms I didn't recognize and moved in groups like they were patrolling something. Sometimes I would hear sounds coming from behind the locked doors, mechanical noises like heavy machinery running, but also other sounds that made my skin crawl. Screaming, crying, voices begging for help. I asked Carl about it, but he shut me down immediately. "Mind your own business," he said. "Some things are better left alone." The breaking point came during a late-night shift in February. I was replacing some wiring near one of the restricted sections when I heard a sound that made me freeze. A child crying? Not just upset crying, the desperate, terrified sobbing of a kid in real danger. I followed the sound to a heavy metal door marked B-level restricted access. The crying was definitely coming from behind that door. I tried my maintenance key card, not expecting it to work, but the light turned green and the door clicked open. The smell hit me immediately. antiseptic mixed with something organic and rotten. The corridor beyond was different from the normal tunnels. The walls were white tile instead of concrete, and the lighting was harsh and clinical. It felt more like a laboratory than a theme park facility. The crying was louder now, echoing from somewhere deeper in the restricted area. I walked down the corridor, passing doors with small windows. Through the glass, I could see rooms that looked like medical facilities. Operating tables, machines I didn't recognize, and walls lined with what looked like specimen jars. But it was the last room that made me run. Through the window, I saw children, maybe a dozen of them, all between the ages of 5 and 12. They were lying on tables connected to machines by tubes and wires. Their eyes were open, but they weren't moving. They just stared at the ceiling with blank, empty expressions. And standing over them was someone in a white lab coat, doing something to one of the kids with surgical instruments. I turned to run, but a security guard was already behind me. A big man in a black uniform with a taser in his hand. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly. I woke up in the employee parking lot 12 hours later with no memory of how I got there. My head was pounding, and there was a small bandage on my arm, like I'd been given an injection. When I tried to go back to work, I was told my employment had been terminated. No explanation, just a severance check and a non-disclosure agreement that threatened legal action if I ever talked about what I'd seen. I signed it because I was scared. But I can't stop thinking about those children. I did some research and found dozens of missing persons reports from families who'd visited the theme park. Children who disappeared during their vacation and were never found. But I know better. Those kids are still there, somewhere in the tunnels beneath the happiest place on earth. And whatever's being done to them is worse than death. Story 6. The parade that never ends. Every theme park has daily parades, floats decorated with beloved characters, music, dancing, and hundreds of performers bringing joy to thousands of guests. They're scheduled precisely, running the same route at the same time every day. But what happens when a parade refuses to end? I worked in entertainment operations at Florida's most famous theme park for 5 years. My job was coordinating the daily parades and making sure everything ran smoothly. Performers in position, floats working properly, music queued up correctly. The incident happened during our biggest parade of the year, the Magic Kingdom's anniversary celebration. We had 20 floats, over 200 performers, and a route that took 45 minutes to complete. Everything started normally. The parade began at 3 p.m. sharp, and I was stationed at the halfway point to monitor the timing. But as the parade passed my position, I noticed something strange. There were more performers than there should have been. I checked my roster. We had 200 cast members scheduled, but I was counting at least 250 people in the parade. Extra dancers, additional characters, performers I didn't recognize. They were dressed correctly and seemed to know the choreography, but they weren't on my list, and there was something off about the way they moved. The scheduled performers danced with energy and enthusiasm, but the extra people moved mechanically, like they were sleepwalking through the routine. I radioed my supervisor. "We have unauthorized performers in the parade. Should I stop it?" "Negative," came the reply. "Parade is running perfectly. Stay at your position." But I could see the extra performers clearly. They were there, dancing alongside our cast members, but somehow invisible to everyone else. As the parade continued, I noticed more problems. The music was lasting longer than it should, and the performers who shouldn't be there were becoming more obvious. Some of them looked like they'd been in accidents. A dancer with a broken neck that bent at an impossible angle. A character performer whose costume was torn and stained with something dark. A musician whose instrument was covered in rust and decay. They all kept performing, but their movements were wrong. Too slow, too deliberate, like marionettes being controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. The worst part was their faces. The performers I didn't recognize all had the same expression, blank, staring eyes and mouths frozen in artificial smiles. I left my position and followed the parade to its endpoint. Normally, the performers would disperse to changing areas after the show ended. But this time, something different happened. The official cast members went to their assigned locations, but the extra performers just kept going. They continued down the parade route, even though the music had stopped and the guests had moved on. They danced and waved to empty streets, performing for an audience that was no longer there. I followed them, trying to understand what was happening. The unauthorized performers completed the entire parade route again, then started a third lap. That's when I realized who they were. Over the years, several cast members had died while working at the park. Heart attacks during hot summer days, accidents involving the heavy parade floats, performers who collapsed from exhaustion and never recovered. The park kept these deaths quiet. But I remembered the names from internal memos and safety meetings. Jennifer Martinez, a dancer who died from heat stroke during a parade in 2018. Robert Kim, a character performer who was struck by a float in 2019. Sarah Walsh, a musician who had a fatal allergic reaction in 2020. They were all there, still performing in the parade they died during. I tried to approach Jennifer Martinez, but she walked right through me like I was made of air. Her eyes never focused on anything, and her smile never changed. The dead performers completed 7 full circuits before they finally faded away as the sun set. Every parade now includes performers who died doing what they loved. They can't let go of the show, can't accept that their final performance has ended. The guests don't see them, but other cast members do. We've learned not to talk about it, because the show must go on, even after death. After hearing all of that, would you ever feel safe at a Florida theme park again? These stories come from real employees who worked behind the magic at some of the world's most famous attractions. They've seen things that the theme park companies spend millions to cover up, things that would destroy the family-friendly image these parks have built their empires on. But maybe that's the price of magic. Maybe when you create a place where dreams come true, you also create a place where nightmares can take root, where the dead refuse to leave the happiest places on earth. Drop your own theme park horror story in the comments. I might feature it in the next video. Which one of these stories disturbed you the most? Was it the children trapped in Small World forever? The dead mascot who won't retire? Or the secret tunnels beneath the magic? Hit that subscribe button if you want more true horror stories that will ruin your favorite vacation destinations. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them.